Good morning to everybody. And I have always said that teachers play a very, very important role in shaping the mind of our future generation. So I make it a point to express my gratitude and respect to all the teachers who are involved in teaching and shaping our future. I know Herbertpur School is a special school in the sense that unlike other Tibetan schools where we have mostly in Tibet, we have both a mix of Indian and Tibetan students. And I can imagine it's quite a challenge to maintain the balance between the Indian students who have to keep to their roots, grow up in their culture, and then we have the Tibetan students who are in a way underprivileged compared to Indian students because we are a refugee community in India. And we have the responsibility of preserving our identity in terms of our language, our religion and culture. But at the same time, the curriculum also should be balanced in a manner that each does not impose on each other, but coexist in unity, right? That's the challenge, and I think the principal and the school administration and all the teachers are doing a wonderful job. When I first came here in 2021, just after the Indian government decided that we should take over all the schools that used to be run by the Central Tibetan Schools Administration, I made it a point to visit all the residential schools, all the 6 residential schools from Dalhousie to Simla to Herbertpur, Mussoorie, CST Mussoorie, Kalimpong and Darjeeling in one go in about 10 days. But it was not a very pleasant visit, if I recall, during my first visit here. If you were here 3 years ago, some of you must have witnessed what happened on this campus. We were very committed to providing education to children, whether it is Indian students or Tibetan students, it doesn't matter, because all of us are branded as Indians or Tibetan, but we are all human beings. We are all same human beings. And we have the responsibility also to pay back to the government of India, who has been very, very, how do I call it, very, very generous in their humanitarian assistance for the Tibetans since we came into exile here in India in 1959. So I'm very happy to see that the school is progressing very well under the leadership of the principal and the academic teachers and the administrators here. And we hope to look forward to a brighter future for all the students who are studying here in this school. So let us keep that going. Apart from the grant indeed that we receive from the government of India to fund this school, to pay for the teachers, the administration and all that, the Central Tibetan Schools Administration also provides extra amenities for the students that are distributed equally to all the Tibetan schools that are run by Tibetans, about 62 schools in all. With that, I thought today, I really appreciate all the programs that you have organized, the students who spoke, who recited poems. I think it's of very high quality. So that reflects the standard of the school in many ways. That's also the reason I understand there are so many students who want to get admitted here, but unfortunately we have limited capacity here. So please keep up the good work. I think the results also showed, but results are only part of what you are learning. Examination is not everything. It's not enough to be good only in studies, but you have to be good in your day-to-day conduct of your life. Then only you become a contributing member of this international community. Now we cannot think only about Tibet or India or the region. We have to think globally You have to think bigger, larger, on every issue that confronts our community today. So there will be a lot of challenges in your life, small, big, bigger, but how do you overcome those challenges depends on the intelligence that you gain when you study in your school, when you grow up, go into the larger community, and then interact with other people, try to understand their emotion, try to understand their rationale also, which is more important. That is why we have all these dialectics classes here. It might seem for some people who don't know the content of these dialectics, they might feel that it's show, but it's not a show. It's to do with reasoning, because Tibetans follow what is called as the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism, which came from India. And Nalanda tradition focuses a lot on logic and reason behind every decision that you make. So these dialectics are very helpful. If the Indian students can also do the dialectics in Hindi or English, that would be useful for developing your mind and the power of logic, which is very important. Of course, in this world, a lot of people take decisions based on emotions, not much on logic. But when you take responsibility, then your decisions has to be based on logic. So today I thought, since we are both Tibetan and Indian students, it's good to, because I go to a lot of, I've started going to Indian universities and speak about Tibet. Last month I was in Symbiosis University in Pune. Before that I spoke in St. Joseph's University in Bangalore, Mount Carmel's and Ramaya University in Bangalore, and then by next year, if I find a little more time, I plan to visit more universities around India. In UK, I have spoken at the Oxford Students' Council. They have a very unique arrangement to empower the students to organize programs on their own, where the university keeps a budget for the students, and the students organize events of that nature, where I was also invited to speak at Oxford. I spoke at Aberdeen University, in Westminster University, and the last time, this January or February, I spoke at Warwick University. So these are prestigious universities. I've been speaking to universities. As His Holiness always says, now you cannot change the mind of elder people, but the younger people, they are growing up, their mind are just shaping up, so it's good to provide them information. We are not trying to impose our will or our thinking on the children. Whenever I go to universities also, I tell them, we speak our perspective. Now, others may speak their own perspective, how they see things. Now, it's for the students, it's important that you listen to everybody who has different perspectives. Because for everything, there are so many different perspectives, different dimensions to issues. It's not just one-dimensional. So the more you understand different dimensions of an issue, then you are better placed to take the right decision, depending on all the feedback that you get from different sources. So today, we'll speak a little bit about India-Tibet relations, because that's not very well known. When I traveled around also, we have lived here for 65 years. In fact, I was born here, and many of my contemporaries have not seen Tibet. Some of the teachers may have come from Tibet and may have seen, including Gishila here, came from Tibet in 1991. And when you find time, you can spend time with Gishila separately to learn about his experience of his life in Tibet, so that you understand the nature of the Sino-Tibet conflict, why it is prevalent even today. So when I travel around also, we live under the illusion that Indians would know about us, because we have lived here in India for the last 65 years. But unfortunately, not many know about Tibet and the Tibetan people. The students here might also, even if you are studying in a Tibetan school run by Tibetans and funded by the government of India, you might have a very fuzzy idea of what Tibet is, even though you are only a few hundred kilometers from the Tibetan border. Even among the elderly people, there are very few people who understand Tibet as they should. So I will start with some basic information about Tibet. The story or the myth is also that the first king of Tibet, way back about 2,300 years ago, So the first king of Tibet, according to some myth, was Prince Rupati, who came from India. And of course, this is just one version. There are other versions that the first king of Tibet also came from other parts of Tibet. But there are also two versions which says that the first king of Tibet came from India. One is Prince Rupati, and the other one was Prince from maybe Kuch Bihar area, present-day Bengal area. Webbed prince, supposedly left astray by their parents and came to Tibet and was recognized by the Tibetans. And he pointed at the sky, that he came from the sky. And Tibetans at those days used to respect the sky. So he was enthroned as the first king of Tibet, the shouldered enthroned king of Tibet. And since that time, the Yalung dynasty, up to 9th century, flourished. And Tibet at one time was a big empire in Central Asia, alongside China and Mongolia. So Tibetans around 8th century conquered the capital of China, present-day Xiangyang, and we put a puppet king there in the place of the Chinese emperor. And we even went up to Samarkand, the present-day Uzbekistan. So that used to be the extent of Tibetan empire at one time. Now, the introduction of Buddhism is traced back to 3rd, 4th century, where we talk about a Tibetan king called Pathodari Genje, who received a sacred text which was not decipherable to the Tibetans those days because we didn't have a language. And that was kept as a sacred for many centuries, several centuries before we could decipher the writings on it. And then the King Songtsen Gampo sent his minister, I think most probably to Kashmir at that time, because Kashmir was a hotbed of intellectualism during those periods when there was a confluence of Buddhism, of Hinduism, of Islam, and all the intellectuals together in Kashmir. And the Tibetan script came from India. Many people ask me whether Tibetan language has anything to do with Chinese language, because Tibet presently is occupied by China. But this Tibetan language has nothing to do with Chinese language. Chinese is pictographic, where the Tibetan language is based on Indian, Brahmi and Gupta script. Even today, when you study with the Tibetan students, you realize that when we recite our consonants, ka, ka, khana, cha, cha, chanya, ta, ta, thana, it's very similar to Hindi, right? You have ka, 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 ga, nga, cha, 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 ja, nga. But we have only 4 vowels, e, u, e, o. You have Hindi, many vowels. I forgot how many, a, a, e, e, u, u, e, m, o, a, so many things I forgot. But language is very similar to Indian language, okay? And then from 8th century, Buddhism flourished in Tibet. We started institutionalizing Buddhism. 7th century, the king Songtsen Gampo married a Chinese princess and also a Nepalese princess. Both of them brought a statue of Buddha from their respective countries because Buddhism spread to China much before it came to Tibet. So you have Chinese scholars who visited India in 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries. But Tibet was much closer. So Tibet is just your next door neighbor. But it didn't spread to Tibet till about 8th century. 8th century we started institutionalizing the Buddhist centers. And Shanta Rakshita, one of the Indian masters who came to Tibet to spread Buddhism, and Guru Padmasambhava, the tantric practitioner who was instrumental in, how do I call that, subduing the demons, were responsible for spreading Buddhism in Tibet. And Shanta Rakshita, in his wisdom, suggested that instead of Tibetans learning Sanskrit or Pali language, which used to be prevalent during Buddha's time, it's best that Tibetans, since Tibetans have a language, it's better to transliterate every available Sanskrit and Pali text into Tibetan language. And that's exactly what we did. So we must have had the biggest transliteration house in the world around 8th and 9th century, because we transliterated every available Sanskrit and Pali Buddhist text into Tibetan. So today, we are a repository of one part of ancient Indian wisdom, which is manifested in the messages of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the world. Because His Holiness the Dalai Lama also says, I am a messenger of Indian wisdom. So India is a country that all Tibetans look up to. We call India the land of Aryavrat, all learned people, because it's a land of the Buddha, and we respect Buddha. We follow his teachings. That is why the relationship, even though we are a little different in look, I was born in Karnataka, so I say I'm a Kannadiga, because our mind is same. Because our way of life is dictated by our thinking. And our thinking is based on Buddha's teachings, which is very similar also to Hindus, because Hindus also consider on the higher level there may be differences. But on the surface level, all religions, all major religions talk about the same values of compassion, of forgiveness and all that. So the relation between Tibetans and Indians, because not many Indians could come to Tibet also. There are very few Indian masters who managed to come to Tibet. And it was very difficult for Tibetans also to come to study in India. Those days you have to walk over so many mountains and valleys to reach India. And in 10th century, Marpa Losava, a famous translator who started the Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, traveled to India at least 3 times in his lifetime. Can you imagine how much effort and arduous journey that Marpa Losava had to endure to receive Buddha's teaching from the land of the Buddha? And that's how much we respect India and the land of India and the people of India. That is why His Holiness always says, India is our Guru and we are India's chelas. And we are an extension of Indian culture based on Buddhism. Okay? So, no other country in this world has a complete set of transliterated format of Buddha's teachings of 100 books, 100 volumes, and more than 110 or 125 volumes of commentaries on Buddha's teachings, which are also composed by very learned Indian masters like Nagarjuna, and we count about 17 Indian masters whose texts we study even today. So when you look at Tibetan monks, they might look a little different, but they study the same things what your masters, what your ancestors taught. And that is why we are very close culturally, religiously. Okay? But historically, you have never shared, India has never shared any border with China, right? So when I speak, when I go around, I carry a very rudimentary PowerPoint presentation just to give you an idea of what Tibet is all about. Many years ago, I met a Pakistani journalist and he asked me, which is bigger, Tibet or Bhutan? Which is bigger? Tibet is at least 10 times the size of UK, 18 times the size of Japan, right? Almost 60-70% of India. So Tibet is huge in terms of area. Tibet's border with India starts from Kashmir, Jammu Kashmir, to Ladakh, to Lahore Spiti, Darchula and all that, and then Tibet borders with Nepal, right? And then it touches Sikkim, and then it borders with Bhutan, and the whole of Arunachal Pradesh. So you have more than 3,600 kilometers of border between India and Tibet. Unfortunately, today that border is one of the most non-porous border in the world. There is hardly any human-to-human connection. You don't see too many Indians going into Tibet, or you don't see any Tibetans or Chinese coming into India through the Indo-Tibetan border. Of course, today it's being termed as Sino-Indian border, but then I keep saying that the Indian government still has not changed the name from Indo-Tibetan Border Police or Indo-Tibetan Border Force. They have still kept it Indo-Tibetan, not Sino-Indian. So which also underlies India's position on this border, because this border was demarcated by British India, McMahon, Sir McMahon, and Vincent Chatra of independent Tibet, right? So here I will provide you with a very basic idea of where in this map you can see the Tibetan plateau, right? It's not hand-drawn, it's all satellite images that you find these days, so it's real picture. And here you can see when we speak about the geo-strategic importance of Tibet, the location of Tibet itself in the heart of Asia, you can find the plateau. But the plateau itself is not the whole of Tibet. The plateau extends beyond the political Tibet. Okay, you have the plateau extending into Afghanistan, into Pakistan, and up to Burma, because the Tibetan plateau came up because of the tectonic shift between the Indian plate and the Eurasian plate. So the tectonic shifts are still happening. And because of the tectonic shift, Tibet came up like this, as a plateau, on this world. And the tectonic shifts are still happening. And scientists say that Himalayas are still growing every year by a certain millimeter. So that is the dynamism of the Himalayas, how it came about and how the Tibetan plateau came about. So in Tibetan, all the Tibetan students would know, when we recite the prayer for the long life of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, we say in Tibetan, Kangri Rabe Korbe Shinkham Dir. So when you translate that into Tibetan, into English, then it's called the heavenly abode, the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges. Now, why do we call it the land surrounded by snow mountain ranges? Now, this map taken from the Bay of Bengal, the satellite image of Tibet, shows the altitude of Tibet. It's very high. You're very close to the Himalayas, right? But we are more, when you go towards Mussoorie and then further beyond, those are more the foothills of Himalayas. The real Himalayas are very, very tall, the tallest mountain ranges in the world. So in south you have the Himalayas, and on the other sides you can see in the other maps also how elevated. So you have in the south you have the Himalayas, then in the west you have the Karakoram, in the north you have the Kunlun ranges, and then also the Karakoram ranges. In the east there are a series of mountain ranges, right? So Tibet is surrounded by snow mountain ranges. That is why we say Kangri Rabe Ko Shinkham down. High altitude, it's mostly desert or it's mostly barren areas. Not all Tibetan areas are habitable because of mountains and valleys. It's not easy to come out of Tibet if you don't have aeroplane, because those days there were no airplanes or motor vehicles or roads for that matter. So to come out of Tibet is a very, very arduous job. Sometimes you lose your life just having to cross over the Himalayas. Many of the young children who came over the Himalayas had to struggle a lot. Some lose their, fingers or toes because of frostbite, or sometimes you get killed when Chinese shoot you crossing over the Himalayas illegally. Then the Westerners started calling Tibet the roof of the world. Since Tibet is very high, it was not possible for everybody to travel to Tibet. Most of the Westerners who came to Tibet were missionaries. They were Jesuit missionaries, Christian missionaries, who considered Tibet as the last frontier where Christianity could not spread, right? So these people started coming to Tibet from late 16th century, early 17th century. There were few Christian churches that were also established in Tibet. Now you don't even see the ruins. But the Westerners, I read one book called The Frontier Outpost by a Christian missionary who used to work on the Tibet-China border in Gansu province. And this person had written a book called The Frontier Outpost, and one of the chapters was titled as The Roof of the World. So I don't know whether it started from that time, in 1906, when this book was published, or the reference to Tibet as the roof of the world could have been much earlier, because there were visitors in the earlier centuries. So Tibet, others call Tibet the roof of the world. Again, why? Why Tibet is the roof of the world? Because of Tibet's altitude. So the average altitude of Tibet is about 4,000 meters, about 13,000, 14,000 feet above sea level. So when I go to Japan, I ask the same question to Japanese students: what is your highest mountain? And they say Mount Fuji. How high? 3,700 meters, 3,800 meters. And I tell them 3,700, 800 meters is like the base camp in Tibet. You start climbing up from there. So your highest mountain in Japan is like base camp, just like Cook Mountain, Mount Cook in New Zealand. So every country I go, I compare the height of their highest mountain to the Tibet's altitude, and then tell them stories about how high Tibet is. So in this map itself, you can see how high Tibet is and why foreigners, particularly Westerners, started calling Tibet the roof of the world. Now today, present day, this is also another map geographically to show you how high Tibet is. And then this is a map to show why environmental scientists call Tibet as the third pole. Now I'm telling you all these stories because for Indian students, it concerns your security. It concerns your environment, right? For the Tibetans, I make them feel proud to be a Tibetan, because it's not enough to say I'm a Tibetan. It's very important to understand why Tibet is important, not only for Tibetan people, but for India and the region and globally, right? So here, lately, of course, since 1932, somebody had used the term third pole for Tibet, but it has not been used very much. Now lately, Chinese environmental scientists call Tibet the third pole. Why Tibet is the third pole? Which are the other two poles? North and South Pole, right? So aside from the North and South Pole, Tibet has the largest amount of glaciers and permafrost that feeds all these major rivers that go from Tibet to around 10 different countries around Tibet, right? That is why Tibet is called the third pole. So the significance of Tibet's climate change, the climate change that is happening on the Tibetan plateau is twice the speed of climate change in a normal place. Whereas the climate change on North and South Pole is 3 times that normal, right? And Tibet is 2 times the normal. So it's going to have severe implication on Indian weather system because of climate change on Tibet. if you go into details about how Indian climate is conditioned by the weather and climatic conditions on the Tibetan plateau, you will learn that the jet streams that flow over the Tibetan plateau and the El Nino impact of the warming of the Pacific in the region impacts which areas in India is going to be hot. And then the depression sets in because of the hotness. And then the rainfall is also decided by that. Now you see a lot more rainfall than earlier times. I was in Ponta Sahib day before yesterday. Yesterday we were supposed to go to Kumrao and Sadhan, but we couldn't go because of the rain. And there was also flood in Puruwala. Some roads were destroyed. We went to see yesterday morning. So all these things are happening. The monsoon season in India is also dictated by the climate change or the weather conditions inside Tibet. That much you should understand. And not just India, Tibet, which are neighboring countries. Tibet's weather condition has impact on the other side of the world, Amazonia. Amazonia is the lung of the world, right? There's the thick forest there. And Tibet is the roof of the world. Now, if you just imagine the interconnectedness of these places, you might find it very remote. But there was a scientific journal report on when there is more rain in Amazonia, then there is less snow in Tibet. And when there's more snow in Tibet, then there's less rain in Amazonia. So if you understand the interdependent nature of our existence, it extends beyond where you live and the immediate proximity of your environment, right? It just doesn't rest there, it goes way beyond, right? So this is the third one. Then, of course, some call Tibet as the water tower of Asia. China does not share any hydrological data with any of its downstream countries, including India. So that is why India has a problem with China, not just on the political front, or not just because of China's belligerence on the Indian border, but also on environmental issues. Many years ago, I remember artificial lake that was formed in Tibet called the Purishu. The Indian government was not informed about the hydrological data, and when that Purishu lake got burst, then it created a lot of havoc in India. So if Chinese government shares those hydrological data, then India can also take remedial or preventive measures to move people from the banks, river banks and all that. When Chinese government does not inform you what's happening inside, then it creates a lot of problem. Now, because of the melting of ice or glaciers on the Tibetan plateau, now a lot more artificial lakes are being created, right? And China is harnessing Tibet's water like there is no boundary. It might have severe implications on themselves also. So when we talk about Tibet as the water tower of Asia, then you talk about these major rivers. In the east, if you see, you have the Yangtze. Yangtze originates from the Tibetan plateau. And Yangtze is the cradle of Chinese civilization. We call it the Machu River in Tibet. It originates from Tibet and travels all the way into northern China. And because of this river and the other river called the other river called the Yangtze, this is Yangtze, originates from Tibet and goes into southern China. This goes into northern China. Without these two rivers, China cannot support its 1.4 billion people. More than 50% of China's water is polluted. It's only fresh water, ice water that comes from Tibet and that saves Chinese lives. So it has to be of great importance and significance for the Chinese government to preserve the watershed area that is called Tibet, right? In 1998, there was a huge flood across the Yangtze, and it resulted in so many lives being destroyed and so many properties also destroyed. And still they are not learning enough lessons because they are building multiple dams on these rivers on the Machu, on the Dishu. On the upper reaches of Dishu, they are planning 13 mega dams, 13 big dams. So then again, we talk about Mekong, which is Gyamungmuchu in Tibetan. Mekong originates from Tibet. It flows into 5 different Southeast Asian countries, right? Laos, Burma, Cambodia, Thailand, and Vietnam. So Tibetan river that originates from Tibet flows into 5 different countries in Southeast Asia, and this Mekong River is a major lifeline for these people. Now, when I travel to these countries, I hear a lot more stories about people's livelihoods being changed because of the river condition that's coming into from Tibet. And China has built multiple dams on the Mekong alone. Last time I counted dams that were finished and dams that are in the planning stages were about 32 before it reaches the next country. And then you also have Salween and Irrawaddy that originates from Tibet, and Salween and Irrawaddy that goes into Burma, right? And then you have the Tsangpo, the Brahmaputra. In India, it's called Brahmaputra. In Tibet, it's called Tsangpo. And in Arunachal Pradesh, it's called Siang River. And this originates from Western Tibet, comes all the way to east, and takes a U-turn to come into Arunachal Pradesh, and then into Assam and Burma. Now, the Chinese government is building a mega dam at this place called the Great Bend. This is called the Great Bend, where the Tsangpo takes a U-turn to come into India, right? They are building a mega dam twice the size of Three Gorges Dam, which is the biggest in the world. And that's also in China, right? And this mega dam is supposed to produce 3 times hydroelectricity than the Three Gorges Dam. So you can imagine when China is building a mega dam of this size at this place called Pema, then you can imagine how much land is going to be inundated upstream. How many kilometers of land will be underwater? How much of flora, how much of fauna, how much of villages and towns that would be submerged because of this bank? That is very little compared to what could happen in the future. Because this whole region, this whole Himalayan region is a seismic zone. You always hear about some or the other earthquake happening. 100 years ago, 115 years ago, there was a huge earthquake in Himachal Pradesh and destroyed many buildings, including the building that young husband used to live in Dharamsala, right? So here, this is a major problem for India, because I traveled to Arunachal Pradesh about 2 years ago. Fortunately for us, the state government gives us state guest status. And when I travel around, the state government sends helicopter for me to travel. And I traveled from one Tibetan settlement called Meo to another Tibetan settlement called Tuting on the Indo-Tibetan border, right? And we were taken over the Brahmaputra in the helicopter, and I could see that the river that comes out of Tibet, which should be pristine clear because it was not rainy season, it was a normal season. It's very murky when we were traveling on that river, right? But the tributaries that joins the Brahmaputra was pristine clear, very clear, like, you can see from the sky. So, which means to say, and when I asked the locals, they told me it has not been happening for the last few months. This has been going on since 2018, which means that China is doing a lot of work at this place called Pema here in this area. And if something happens to this size of a dam, what will happen to people in Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, and Bangladesh? They are all going to be washed away. So it's going to have catastrophic impact, consequences on neighboring countries. Then you also have Karnali, River Karnali that flows from Tibet into Nepal, and then it joins the Ganges. Then you have Ganges also originating from the Indo-Tibetan border. Then you have the Indus that originates from Tibet and goes into the last month or 2 months ago, I was in Ladakh before I traveled to the United States. So there also we could see Indus as the border between Tibet and Ladakh. And Indus, that originates from Tibet, is home to one of the most ancient civilizations. What is that? The Indus Valley civilization, right? So this is how important Tibet is, not only to Tibetan people, but to the whole region. So all these countries that I talked about, from Pakistan, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Laos, Burma, Cambodia, Thailand, Vietnam, and China, 10 different countries. You know, the majority of their perennial waters come from Tibet. And these waters are sources of food for the region. So we are talking about serious food security and water security issues in the future. And some people say that Third World War could happen because of water. If that is the case, then Tibet is a huge bio hotspot, right? And that is how important Tibet's environmental condition is to the whole world, and not only to Tibet and the region. So this is just to speak about the importance of the significance of Tibet, not only to the Tibetans, but when we speak about the significance of Tibet and also the geostrategic importance of Tibet, Tibet being located in the center of India, in the Asia, and India was pre-independent, before India's independence, or before East India Company, or before Britishers ruled India. India was not what is today, today's India, right? India was many principalities, many kingdoms, and all that. And even China was not how it was. So it is more like, yeah, that is such a good idea. Was there go for it? Can't do it, I'm a chick cheddar. Don't go for it. On Duche, call it some. The geostrategic importance of Tibet. Right? So because Tibet was between India and China, there was never ever a China-India border till Communist China invaded Tibet in 1950. Right? Communist China took over the control of China in 1949, and they occupied Tibet in 1950 forcefully, which under international law should be null and void, right? So when we speak about geostrategic importance of Tibet, then we also speak about the history of Tibet. So I provided you a very brief overview of the history of Tibet up to 13th century. 7th to 9th century, Tibet was a huge empire. Then Tibet disintegrated for about 400 years. But within that period, we were very fortunate to have learned Tibetans who went to India to study and then introduced these new lineages called the Kagyu tradition of Tibetan Buddhism or Sakya tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. And then 13th century, we first developed relations with the Mongols when Genghis Khan became a big power in Asia, and the fifth Khan, Kublai Khan, following Mongke Khan, we developed relations with Kublai's father. Sajja Pandita Kungwa developed relations with Kublai's father, and then his nephew, Dongye Shige Phawa, developed relations with his successors, with Kublai and his successors. Now, after we established relations with the Mongols in 1247, Mongols invaded China in 1271. And if you read Chinese history, from 1271 till 1368, when the Mongols ruled China, it was called the Yuan dynasty. But the Mongols were there even before that. Mongols were there even after that, But for Chinese historian, the Yuan period is only that period when the Mongols ruled China. And Mongols also had influence with the Tibetans. Just like we enjoy Guru-Chela relationship with India, Mongols look up to Tibetans as masters, Buddhist masters. So we became, the priest for the Mongol kings, and Mongol kings became patrons for the Tibetans. So that is how we developed this unique priest-patron relationship. Now, in China, the Mongols were overthrown by the Mings. The Mings are the real Chinese, Han Chinese, because they're talking about 56 nationalities, right? And they ruled China from 1368 to 1644, almost 300 years. During that period, Tibet was ruled by three dynasties. The Pamodrupa dynasty for about 100 years, Rinpoche dynasty for about 100 years, and Devatsangpa for about 100 years, till the fifth Dalai Lama took over the temporal and spiritual leadership of Tibet in 1642. 2 years before the Mings were overthrown by the Qings. And Qings are Manchus. They are not Chinese. They are from Manchuria. They invaded China and ruled China from Beijing. And if you look at Kung Fu movies, do you watch Kung Fu movies? Kung Fu movies? Kung Fu. If you watch Kung Fu movies, more of contemporary stories, then you will find that the Manchus are all Dakus. Sab Daku hai Manchu log. Okay, Chinese perspective, the societal perspective of the Chinese societal perspective of the Manchus is that they are not Chinese. They are outsiders, just like they treat Mongols as outsiders or Tibetans as outsiders. We are not just outsiders to the Chinese. They call us barbarians. So Tibetans are barbarians for Chinese. That is why they build the Great Wall to keep the barbarians away, the Mongols and the Tibetans away. Today, Great Wall is not a boundary. It has become the backbone of the Chinese map, if you look at the map of Great Wall in China. So there was a difference, 1642, the fifth Dalai Lama took over, the Qings took over China only in 1644, 2 years after the fifth Dalai Lama took. Then Tibet was ruled successively by the Dalai Lama, still the 14th Dalai Lama, who is present with us today in India. And China was ruled by the Qing Manchus, till 1911. Then there was nationalist movement, then there was communist and all that. So some say, Indian scholars, historians also say, Tibet became independent in 1913. Then what about the period before that? Nobody studies all this. So we say the Chinese also came into Tibet in 1910. They killed many Tibetans on their way in Kham, right? And before that, 1904, the young husband expedition of British India came up to Lhasa. They invaded Lhasa. But where was China then to defend Tibet if they claimed sovereignty over Tibet? 1910, 1912, we kicked out every single Chinese out of Tibet. And many of them were sent through Calcutta. We didn't send them back through Tibet, from eastern Tibet, because we thought that they would come back with reinforcement. But China was already breaking up during those times, because that was the end of the Qing Empire and the beginning of the nationalist movement, right? So this is just to give you a brief account. That is why today, when I travel around, when I meet governments, I carry 2 books with them, and I tell them, if you keep repeating that Tibet is part of China, just like Chinese say, since ancient times. When was that ancient time? Tibet has never been part of China in that sense, right? So we tell governments, if you keep repeating that Tibet is part of PRC, you're going against international law. Because what's happening to Ukraine today, because of Russia's invasion, and what happened to Tibet 74 years ago, is the same thing. Because it's the same international law. There are no 2 international laws, right? And under international law, if any country had conquered another country by force, then it should be null and void, right? This is one thing we make. Another point we make is, we tell them, okay, countries keep repeating that Tibet is part of PRC, and then on the other hand, they keep saying, we support negotiations between the representative of His Holiness Dalai Lama and the Chinese government. And we tell them, you are contradicting yourself. How? When every country in this world keeps saying Tibet is part of PRC, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? You understand that logic? If Tibet has already been part of China, if every country in this world recognizes Tibet as part of China, then where is the reason for China to come and talk to us? And the third thing we tell the governments is that why do you think Chinese government is asking every other government to say Tibet is part of China? Why not Manchuria is part of China? Why not Mongolia is part of China? Why not what Chinese call as Xinjiang, or its real name is East Turkestan or Uyghurs? Why not they say Uyghurs are part of China? Why they ask every government to say Tibet is part of China? That is because the Chinese government knows that they have no legitimacy of their rule in Tibet. And they're trying to seek that legitimacy from the international community. Now, when I make a statement here from India on any major issue, if they ask the same question to the Chinese spokesperson in Beijing, they would always say, no country recognizes the government in exile, or no country recognizes the independent nature of Tibet. That is their level of measurement to prove their legitimacy, which is not real legitimacy. That is why we tell governments, read Tibetan history. You just cannot parrot what the Chinese government wants you to say. So the other book I carry, one book is Michael Van Ball's book. I would recommend the school to keep some copies in the school library for you to understand to the broader concept of Tibetan history, because there are versions of Tibetan history from Western scholars, from Tibetan scholars, from Chinese scholars. So if you read all and understand all dimensions of history, then you can make a judgment of your own as to where we are going, right? So historically, we have played the role of a buffer between India and China. So there has never ever been a common boundary. There has never ever been a war between India and China. So only after communist occupation of Tibet, now there's a common boundary, and the first war happened in 1962. Chinese government, Prime Minister came to India, talked about Panchshil and, all that, but after 8 years, as per their plan, they invaded India in 1962. That wound is still very much fresh in Indian mind, particularly now after Doklam, after Tawang, after Ladakh incidents where Chinese are salami slicing India. That expression is being used. It's not necessarily applicable to Hindus who don't eat, or the Muslims who don't eat pork. But salami is pork. They cut small pieces. So Chinese come from the Tibetan side 20 kilometers. When you complain, they go back only 10 kilometers. So they are already in 10 kilometers. And that's how they salami slice India's territory. And that concerns India's security. Now, we are happy that the Indian government is responding in the manner they should, because China respects only strength, not weakness. Earlier, Indian foreign policy is directed only towards Kashmir. Jammu, Kashmir, Pakistan, all the time it's only Kashmir, Pakistan. That is because China maintains a very close relationship with Pakistan to contain India. Pakistani people don't need missile technology to kill other people. They need better employment, better education. But Chinese government is supplying Pakistan with nuclear technology, missile technology. Against whom? That's understandable, right? And China is funding Pakistan with what they call as the Pakistan-China Economic Corridor, with $60 billion worth of investment. After Imran Khan became the Prime Minister, perhaps he managed to renegotiate the deal, but it's still a lot of money. And they're not talking about just building a railway. I read a newspaper report in Thailand. I asked them why you are not encouraging Belt and Road Initiative from China. And they said that China is not asking for only the railway track. They are asking for 50 meters on both sides of the railway track. And if the railway track is long, then you have to, concede so much area. And when there's no security, then they will start sending their own people as security. And that's how they come into other countries, interfere in every countries. So it's important to understand China, particularly for Indians. Now there is a lot more interest from India also, even from South India. Now security issues are not restricted only to Himalayas, which is the land border, right? Now security extends beyond the Himalayas, where China talks about land Silk Road. Now China talks about maritime Silk Road, right? When you say maritime Silk Road, it becomes now the South China Sea is a hot topic, because China claims the whole of South China Sea as their own. Thousands of kilometers from the last beach from China, much closer to Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and all the Vietnam and all these countries. They are claiming everything. So their hegemonistic ambitions are very much there, starting from Tibet and other countries. Now it extends beyond, and that includes China's belligerence on the Indian border. And India is also standing up to its position. So today, Indian government's position is that if there is no disengagement from all sectors, including the last two sectors in Ladakh, there will be no normalization of relationship. Prime Minister Modi tried his best. After he became the Prime Minister, he invited President Xi to his home place in Gujarat. He invited President Xi to Mamallapuram in Tamil Nadu. He himself went to China in Beijing, Shanghai and all that. He went to Wuhan second time. There was a lot of bonhomie, there was a lot of attempts to normalize relationship, build better relations, but it didn't work out. Because China says something and do something totally different. They don't want two major powers in Asia. They want to be the supreme power in Asia. In fact, they want to be the only power in Asia, what they call as the Middle Kingdom. China does not treat India as equal. When it comes to China's relation with United States, then they say United States is not treating us as equal. But is China treating India as equal? Japan as equal? Korea as equal? No, they are not. So they have double standard on everything. One of the foremost Indian socialist leaders used to say that communism is built on the foundation of lies. And that continues today, even today. Communists believe that if you repeat the lie 100 times, it will turn into truth. So if they think that they can claim their right over Tibet by making countries repeat the same statement, they are wrong. So today, we are very committed to finding a peaceful solution, a negotiated solution, a solution that is mutually beneficial both for the Chinese people and the Tibetan people, which should extend to the larger Asian subcontinent, right? And we are committed to follow the non-violent means of resolving conflicts. That is why when I give interviews to major news channels, I always thank them for giving time for non-violence, because there's too much focus on violence. We talk about Israel, Gaza, we talk about Russia, Ukraine, but these are the only two things that you see most on television. There are 55 violent conflicts going on in this world as we speak. These two are not only two countries. We can hear about what's happening in Burma, just next to us. And China's designs around India is very deep. It's not just from the Himalayas, as I was talking about. They are talking about the maritime Silk Road. If you take the South China Sea as a major trading route, sea route, then you have the Malacca Straits. Then Cambodia, China has given a lot of loan to Cambodia. Cambodia is not able to pay back the loans. So they have taken over part of the Sihanoukville port. China has taken over the Coco Islands in Burma. From there, they watch the whole of Bay of Bengal, and which is a huge security threat to India. Now they have taken over the Hambantota port in Sri Lanka, because Chinese government funded building an airport in Sri Lanka and a major seaport. are telling the Sri Lankans that they are going to build this maritime Silk Road and Sri Lanka will become a major hub for flight and sea route. But the business has not picked up. Sri Lanka went bankrupt last year. They didn't have enough money to buy papers for children's examination. This year, they had election. Dissanayaka, a pro-left leader, won as the president of Sri Lanka. But since Sri Lanka is not able to pay back the loan, they have taken over the Hambantota port. Now this is too close to India. And because of Hambantota port, because of Coco Islands, because of its entrenchment in the Sihanouk Wheel port, China is using those leverages to measure the sea. Now they have measured the whole of Bay of Bengal under sea. They can track where the pipes are going. They can track where the internet cables are going under sea. And these are serious security threat for India. Now, China has built better relations with Maldives. Maldives President Muisi was here a few days ago, but the relationship is not very good. They decided to kick out every Indian army from Maldives. This year, by May 10th, every single Indian army was asked to leave Maldives. And they built better relations with China. And China uses Tibet water as a diplomatic tool. Maldives is having drinking water problem. So China sends Tibet glacier water to Maldives as a diplomatic tool to better relations. Now, because of China's relation with Maldives and the original idea of the commercial port like Gwadar in Pakistan now has become a military port because Pakistan is not able to pay back loan to the Chinese government. So this is what is called as debt diplomacy, creating more debts, give more loans, create more debts, people are not able to pay back, then you take over their land, which are strategic land, not just that. And the relation between India and Pakistan is defined as higher than sky. Chinese have very flowery languages to describe those relations. Higher than sky, deeper than ocean, sweeter than honey. That is how they define the all-weather relationship between India and Pakistan. So what we believe is that if there could be a non-violent solution to the Sino-Tibet conflict, then it could have cascading effect in the whole region where there will be a lot more trust between countries. China does not need to support Pakistan as they are doing if there is better relation between China and India, right? So there could be more peace, more prosperity in the whole region. So these are some of the things that I want to tell you, just to give you an overview since we are all now living together, studying together, we live as a community of humanity together. It's important that we all understand each other, our background. Of course, we remain very, very grateful to the Indian government and to the people of India for granting us asylum to be able to stay here. The Indian government has been very, very generous in their humanitarian support for the Tibetan. On political front, we still expect a little more, but it's not so forthcoming. But we still will work together. And we enjoy a very transparent relationship with the Indian government. And we are also very proud to be, as I mentioned before, a repository of ancient Indian wisdom. So we have to keep this relationship going, and particularly from the Indian student side, when you grow up to become administrators or leaders in your area, don't forget about our people, right? Some Indians are not very good because they understand about Tibet too much and then they create problem. But most of the Indians who have studied with the Tibetans, lived with the Tibetans, appreciate the Tibetans and also try to give back to the Tibetan community, just as we are trying to give back to the Indian community for what the Indian government has done to us. So we also receive a lot of support from other governments. So in fact, because of Indian government, we are the only exiled government with a fully functional democratic polity. So we have our Supreme Justice Commission that functions more like an arbitration, and we have our cabinet, our parliament in India, in Himachal Pradesh, in the next state to yours. And we have 37 Tibetan settlements spread across India from east to west to north to south. And I have to visit every single community. And now Tibetans are spread across more than 25 different countries around the world. And I have to travel to all these countries to meet with these Tibetans. It's now that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is going to be 90, he's not able to travel as much as he used to do before. Just a few months ago, His Holiness was in the United States for his knee surgery, and now he's back in India. And at that age, considering his age, he's recovering very well. And His Holiness reassures us that he will live for another 2 decades and more. And I keep telling the Tibetans that whether the Dalai Lama lives that long or not also depends on how we follow his advice. Just like you follow your teacher's advice, your religious teacher's advice, we also have to follow His Holiness' advice. If we follow his advice and move in the right direction, then the Lama will also live long. If we don't follow his advice and behave something and act differently, then it doesn't help the Lama's life also, our life also, our purpose also. So the identity of Tibet is very related to His Holiness Dalai Lama. Once I traveled to South Africa, and the taxi driver, a black African, he asked me, "Where do you come from?" We said, "Tibet." I said, "I don't know." Then we said, "Do you know Dalai Lama?" "Oh yeah, he's a cool guy." So that's the identity of the Tibetans that's also related to the personality of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. So I'm very happy to be able to meet with you, this time in a more calmer atmosphere, and let's hope that the things that happened before does not get repeated. Please tell your parents also that we are committed to serving the Indian community. We are all children, are all same. There's no difference. And we have to keep the harmony between the Indian and the Tibetans going. And when you get educated, and if you are in a position to help, then you should also help us till we get to go back to Tibet.